And there we go. And I want to welcome you back again. I'm Lisa Presley, one of your Mid America Regional Life staff. And working with me today and presenting with me today is Phil. So welcome, Phil. Do you want to say hello to the good people?
Hello, good people.
Thanks for playing along with me, Phil. All right. So today we're going to be talking about mission and vision. And unlike last time, just want to let you know we will be having a number of breakout sessions for you to go more deeply with other participants in this class. One of the first things I always want to talk about is why do we bother to figure out what our mission and vision is? And my favorite phrase, or one of them, is if you don't know where you're going, any road will take us there. But sometimes that takes us to a place we really don't want to be. Other times it's a place where we might want to be, but we had never expected. But more often than not, we just sort of wander around in the forest. I'm reminded of Winnie the Pooh and Heffalump Trail, where they were tracking him and ended up just going back and forth on their own tracks and thinking that there were a gazillion Heffalumps in the deep woods. But that doesn't always help us be who we want to be. We also need our mission and vision to know what our yardstick is for making decisions, or our meter stick if you're into the metric system. So often congregations will find themselves in a conflict or tussle about what do we fund, what don't we fund, which of the competing good projects that we have are going to be helpful, and do we want to put our money in? And so what happens is then you can use your mission, your vision statements as the litmus test where you hold it up and say, of these things we're thinking of, which one gets us closer onto the road that we want to be traveling? And then always you'll know that I said the word we many times already in this presentation. And that reminds me of what is that big question is who is the we are talking about? Is it the like-minded people who we have known all our lives? Is it people who will come in and challenge the way we think? Is it based on what we assume about other people? And so we always need to be asking, we, meaning those of us present in this and those of us living in congregations, we need to ask the questions always of who is included, who is not. Do we intend for those groups of people to be included or not included? Some exclusion is necessary. Not everybody will be comfortable within our vision of where we are going. We meaning a congregation, or we meaning a movement. If there's someone who does not believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and who does not want to make sure that they foster well-being for all, then maybe that person doesn't belong in Unitarian Universalism. So we need to draw lines and boundaries that help us understand who the congregation wants to be, who the congregation wants to include in its sphere of influence, and where the congregation wants to go. Some exclusion is necessary. Phil, over to you, I believe.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, I like your metaphor with the Winnie the Pooh and the Humphalumps or whatever. Yeah, if we don't really try to get a sense of who we are and who we aspire to be, we may not necessarily have a path forward, or as Lisa said, any path will take us somewhere, but it may not be where we wanted to go. So these definitions of vision, mission, and covenant are ones that I have found very helpful in my life and work, my work life, I guess. And I've gotten them from a document called Vision, Mission, and Covenant, Creating a Future Together. I just put that in the chat, a link to that. It's from 2005, which in working with congregations might make it seem like a pretty old resource, but actually I like their perspective on how to think of vision and mission and covenant, and especially these definitions. So I'll go through them here and give you a little more insight into them. A vision is a carefully defined picture of where you want to be in 5 or more years. It is the dream of what you can become. So visions are out there a little ways, and you sometimes hear about 5-year strategic plans and things like that. Um, but it is looking out at that longer future, 5 years or more, and it's who you want to become. The mission, however, is a concise statement of what you want to be known for or known as within the wider world, what you want to mean to the community. And by community, it means the wider community that you're in. And it can be things like you want to promote Unitarian Universalist values. Certainly, we're going to talk about the principles in a moment when we talk about values. It could be what you want to do in the community and what you want to see your community like, working for a better world for everyone in the community. So it's being very explicit about that. It's a concise statement. And then finally, covenant is a statement of how your members will be with and will behave toward one another, as well as what is promised or vowed to one another and to the congregation as a whole. And covenant right now is an important word for us, as we heard from Connie. Anything that's happening now is tied somehow to our history. None of this is new and just sprung fresh out of the soil. And actually right now, in widening the circle, the Commission on Institutional Changes report to the UUA, they talk about some of their big takeaways. And one of them is that faith and covenant are not dirty words. They want us to be using that language again, the language of faith and the language of covenant. And while covenant is not a dirty word, it does have a history. And I just wanted to share you a little bit about the history. This comes from the Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States, which was one of our common reads a couple years ago. And I just want to read you this little passage. It says, "The United States is not unique among nations in forging an origin myth, but most of its citizens believe it to be exceptional among nation states, and this exceptionalist ideology has been used to justify appropriation of the continent and domination of the rest of the world. It is one of the few states founded on the covenant of the Hebrew Torah or the Christian borrowing of it in the Old Testament of the Bible. Other covenant states are Israel and the now defunct apartheid state of South Africa, both of which were founded in 1948. So for indigenous peoples, the word covenant may mean this is what the Europeans use to justify taking over this country, this land. And I think it's good for us to be aware that while covenant is not a dirty word, it does have that history to it, and we should just be aware of that when we use it. But the way we're using covenant here is that it is mainly among ourselves. It is a statement of how we together in a religious community will be with and will behave toward one another. And so that's how we're using the word covenant. And these three things, I think, all fit together well into kind of giving us a way to move into the future that that is a destination for us, that we have some idea about where we want to go. Okay, Lisa, I think we'll move on to the next slide. All right. So in this book on, or this document on covenant and vision, this is what I really liked about it, how they kind of lay out how these things work together. And if you'll notice, right in the middle, we have our values and our covenant, what we hold dear. And what I like about this is that it includes both our aspirational kind of desires, with that dream, that vision of where we will be in 5 years and what our world would be like in 5 years, our community. And then also that concise statement, our mission about who we are and why we exist. But then it can lead us to guide us as we look at what practically do we need to do to get there. So we have our shared ministry goals, which start with a statement like, together in ministry, we will do this. And we have our objectives at the end, specific, measurable strategies. So these can be all sorts of things. They can be how we want to structure our lives together in our congregation, and perhaps we have some goals we want to work towards in our vision. And perhaps some of them might be coming up with a better covenant than we have right now, or coming up with a behavioral covenant, or things like that. It could include things, we might be doing a building project, or we may be looking for new space, or it may be goals about our outreach and how we reach into the community. But they can also be very specific things about, what we might be doing in the community to make the world a better place. So I just really like this, that it just shows that being clear about our values and covenanting together to be in community around those values helps us both think aspirationally, and also to think very practically about how we're going to live out our collective religious lives in our community. So that's kind of my sense about how these things work together. And you'll notice they put covenant and value together. And that's where I want to just kind of touch on the principles again. Connie, I loved in her presentation where she showed us what some of that early kind of form of our principles were with that original union of the Unitarians and Universalists. Here is a version that I have seen lately. It comes from the UUA welcome video that came out a couple years ago. And what they did is they took our principles and purposes. It was a public relations firm that was helping us with our messaging for the world. And they took our principles and purposes as they are written in our bylaws and kind of turned them into what they call real world values. And when I start to think of those values that kind of shape our covenant in the center of that figure, that diagram we had in the previous slide, we can always start with our UU principles. So I love the language for these. Believing in the worthiness of every person, showing compassion and fairness, accepting others for who they are, growing through a personal search for truth, leading with democratic spirit, working for justice, and understanding everything is connected. So when I talk about values with a congregation, I always kind of like to start with these and say, these are our shared Unitarian Universalist values. What other values do you have in your religious community that we might want to add to these? And I really think this is like just the core work when we start talking about vision and mission and covenant, is really to start with those values and be clear about them. So I believe, Lisa, you were going to talk about one more value, one more principle that we might want to include in this.
Yes, I am. And this is the eighth principle. So the eighth principle, the when the UUA started the mission or the principles process, and they were revised in the 80s. I don't think Connie's yet talked about that, but it will be coming up soon if she did not. Um, in the bylaws of the UUA, there is a requirement that the bylaws be reviewed at least once a decade, or the Article 2, it's called, where the purposes and principles are. And so that is a process that is currently ongoing. Phil had posted a link to that information earlier. I'm going to post it in the chat right now again in case you missed it. Because what happened before the Article 2 Commission was created was a group of people led by Paula Cole Jones, who is an African-American woman in our movement, and a great consultant to congregations, as well as work on racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. She spearheaded a project to add an eighth principle. For years, the UUA has been saying that it wants to be an anti-racist organization, and yet it has not been included in our governing principles. So this is a paraphrase of what will be of the eighth principle that Paula created, which is journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community. Many congregations now are looking at this eighth principle and deciding that they want to include it in what they talk about and how they are doing. And so that's a great thing to have happen. And it can allow you to be able to see what is going on um, with those extra values in your congregation, as Phil talked about that he does, where he asks congregations to look at it. Many of them now are looking at the eighth principle. People have also asked, is there a way that we can move this forward? What's next? Well, the thing would be, once the Article 2 Commission is asking for feedback, to be able to give them feedback on this and what your congregation thinks. One thing that One reason why I know the eighth principle is going to come up in that conversation is that Paula Cole Jones is on that Article 2 Commission. So she will be able to do that. There's also a website and a Facebook page. Phil perfectly put up the website. There's also a Facebook page that will have a list of the congregations that the Eighth Principle Project people know have endorsed this principle for their congregation. So with two computers, it's sometimes hard to remember which one you need to push the button on to get the slides to advance. So one of the things when I go to congregations, they will often say, oh, we have a mission statement, and they will pull out a 1 or 2 or 3 page document that says what their mission statement is. And more often than not, it is a value statement about who they want to be as people. And it incorporates a lot of those values. The mission, though, I see as slightly different than a mission statement. The mission is about your purpose, not about how well you can wordsmith. It's about, what are you called to do? Who are you called to be? What is the difference in the world your congregation is striving to make right here and right now? And when I look at a lot of mission statements, it will include lots of stuff, but there's nothing there that helps people focus with their energies and for the congregation to know really the path they're on. And so a mission should also include about how you are transforming your internal community, how you are transforming your wider community, and the question about, if you cease to exist, who in your wider community would notice? We're going to be talking about that question later in some of the groups, but I want to tell you about how I learned about that question. Glenn Thomas Rideout is an African American Unitarian Universalist. He has a doctor in music from the University of Michigan, and he's the music director at our congregation in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I used to be a member of that congregation, and I remember near the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement, Glenn Thomas was giving a sermon to the congregation. And he talked about how things had gotten better because in Ann Arbor, which is a very liberal community, he had only been called the N-word 3 times the year before, whereas it used to be more. This would be while he's walking around downtown. And, we would joke and say, well, that should be Dr. N to, when you're referring to me. But he talked about this and about how even in the most progressive communities, there can sometimes be very racist attitudes and opinions. And he then further went on to say, yes, it is true that Black lives matter. But the true question is whether or not we matter to Black lives. If our congregation ceased to exist, who would notice? Would anyone notice? So as I said, we're going to be talking about that question in one of the breakout groups later. But this is about being more clear about your mission. I also want to talk about a shadow mission. What a shadow mission is, a shadow mission is a mission that is sort of lurking unspoken in your congregation around what your stated mission is, or it can even exist if you don't have a stated mission. Your shadow mission is where you're actually putting your energy, where you're actually putting your money, where you're actually putting all of your time and energy. Shadow missions can be good and they can be not good. It depends on whether or not it's where you truly want to go. So Given your mission or your mission statement, here are some questions to help you try to figure out what your shadow mission might be. What are you really serving? In other words, where's the board and governance energy going? What are you hearing about in the pulpit? Where are you spending your money? Where does your time and energy go? Buildings and grounds. Is there conflict in the congregation? Is it being nice? What else could it be? And again, it sort of answers the question of who would notice if you didn't exist anymore. In some congregations, they are beloved of their buildings. It may be that it has wonderful historical significance, or it may be that they built it with their own hands. And it may be that all of their time and energy goes to preserving the building, but it's not in their mission statement. So that would be the shadow mission. And so it's anything where you are putting your time, energy, money, consideration. It might be that your shadow mission is making everyone happy in our congregation. So you don't deal with conflict. You try to tap down conflict and not have it there and just try to be nice. Not necessarily a bad thing, but it might not be what you feel you are called to do in the larger world. Phil, I believe it's your turn again.
Thank you, Lisa. So before we break into groups, we wanted to start giving you some ideas about ways that when we work with congregations and sometimes gather into groups to talk about things, we like to use a process that sometimes is called circle process. It's in many cases, it's been developed tracing back to work that has processes that have worked in indigenous communities around the world. This particular version that I want to introduce to you right now comes from a group called Essential Partners in Boston, actually. And they've come up with what I think is just kind of the great distillation of just what are the actually essential parts of doing something like circle process. And in all of these kind of variations on circle process, having an agreement at the beginning, having agreements at the beginning is indeed an essential part of it. So I'm just taking these agreements from a document that Lisa and I know from a large UUA meeting we had once where the Essential Partners folks came in and worked with us. And they called it a taste of dialogue. And so the agreements on this, and this is just something that we can, use for now. The agreements are is you can always pass or pass for now. So when you're going in a circle, when it's your turn, you can say pass. And then when that circle is over, we can come around again and see if you do want to add something. So you can always pass. We will respect time limits, usually to make sure everybody has a chance to speak. There is just a certain amount of time we ask for you to talk when it is your turn. And we ask you to respect those times. We will speak one at a time and share airspace. So basically there's no cross talking. What I love about this is you listen more than you speak. So if you have 4 people in the group, you're going to listen 3 times more than you are going to talk. So you want to open up that space for other people to be to have their time to speak and share that airspace with them. Almost always these groups say you will keep things confidential. So the learning goes with you, but the stories stay here. So if somebody shares something that's from their lives, a personal story, if you learn from something from that story, you can talk about your learning, but you don't share the story, you don't give information about the person because it's a confidential thing. And then you speak for yourself, not on behalf of others. We really want to hear what you have to say, not what you're thinking a group of people you represent may have to say or something like that. We want to hear what you have to say. So added to those agreements, then, here's a bit of what the structure is like. Next slide, Lisa. The Essential Partners people call this structured go rounds. And this is what I think is just a great distillation of what really happens in a circle process. One person reads the question aloud. Lisa's going to be giving us the questions when I'm done with this little introduction here, and one person times 2 minutes of silence reflection to prepare to speak. So you just kind of sit silently together. All right. Then the first person speaks for 2 minutes. And then when each person follows, this says you go in clockwise, but what you need to do, because we're not sitting in a room and we can set up the chairs where we sit in a circle, you're going to need to figure out what order you're going to go into. So when you get in your groups, just in the chat, just come up with the order that you're going to go into. And you can do alphabetically by first name or reverse alphabetically by last name, anything, any order like that. But what's nice about this part of the process is you know when you're going to speak. And that allows you to listen carefully rather than worrying about, okay, what am I going to say next? You can say, oh, I'm going to listen for the next 3 people because I don't really have to speak until then. And so you can concentrate on listening more. Okay. And you can always pass or pass for now, as we've said. We do a brief pause between each person who has spoken so we can absorb what they've heard. And then if we were sitting together, we would pass the timer around with the 2 minutes on it. I think you're going to need one person to just kind of help keep track of the time for y'all. But that's kind of the passing from one to the other is another part of the circle process that is generally used in every kind of variation of it. And then as you listen, you may take notes on things you'd like to learn more about. You may have an opportunity to ask questions of each other next. So if you fit within the time frame and there's a little bit of time left over, that's when you can have the open conversation, and somebody might ask a question that came up during the sharing going around in the circle. But the point is, save those questions. You know, we don't really want to interrupt people while we're going around. We want to keep doing the process so everybody has a chance to speak. Okay, so that's just a basic, super simple introduction, but hopefully it's enough to get you started on this. So Lisa?
Thanks, Phil. So again, we're going to break you into groups. You will be magically whisked away into a group. I always think of Harry Potter and the Foo Powder. The groups are intended to be 3 or 4 people in them, and if you're in a group that's too small, I'll try to monitor those. In some of the groups, I'm not sure if you get to see the list of people, but I know that, for example, my second computer and I are not going to be in any group, but I tried to balance it out so you'll have at least 3 people in your group and no more than 4. So we want you to take the first couple of minutes in silence where you can think about the questions on your own and sort of start to formulate your answers rather than having to try to formulate those answers while while someone else is speaking. And then there's going to be 20 minutes of sharing. What we recommend is that you, first of all, figure out the order, as Phil said, who's going to speak, what order are you going to be in, because you won't all be in the same position on the screen with each other. We recommend that you do the first question first. All of you go around, you do the go round, and if somebody has passed for now, you go back and see if they wish to check in to answer it. And then have another minute or so of silence and go on to the second question. And so I'm going to post the questions in the chat right now. Well, they are in the, oops, I'm almost ended the meeting. That was pretty silly. They are on the slide. The first one is, what is my congregation's mission and is it explicit? And then the second one is, what is my congregation's shadow mission and how does it impact the congregation? So those are the 2 questions for the round. So you're going to have about 25 minutes in your groups, just so that you know you can keep track of that on your own, but I will call you back when you're done. Are there any questions about this process? All right, I'm going to open the rooms then, and here we go. I was just saying that the conversations must have been good because nobody rushed back into the main meeting room. Most of you took up that minute warning. So,
They were
um,
awesome.
well, that's great to hear. And now what I'd love to do is I'd love to get from you, if you want to type into the chat any of your missions or your missions. If you want to type in your shadow mission, do that. And any questions you might have coming out of this, and we'll take some time I'll read some of them. I won't be able to read all of them, but put things in the chat and we'll see. You can share from your experience. And I just got to move something out of the way here. Okay. St. John's is committed to creating a safe and caring community, working for peace and social justice. People's Church, a beloved community, embracing and serving our diverse world. And great, there's a couple of you from the same congregation with the same first name who have put that there. That's great. Nurturing the whole human spirit of the for a world made whole. Build community, seek inspiration, promote justice, find peace. There are others that are coming in that are longer, that are getting pushed up. UU Society of Geneva is a diverse, welcoming community which endeavors to make its covenant a living reality, provide religious education, opportunities for growth, etc. Okay. Olympia Brown, our church is a community of hope, challenging us to transform ourselves, to promote love and justice, respect all faiths, and shepherd the planet. Bismarck, support, challenge, and inspire a sense of purpose and belonging that calls us to be agents for change. I learned about collective legacy burdens, and that will inform my racial equity or orientation. Phil, can you unmute? And I'm not exactly sure what you mean by collective legacy burdens, and I'm sure others are wondering too.
So it was shared with me by, I'm gonna have to find her in here. Or she can speak up because there's a lot of faces. So I learned it from someone else in my group, and so they may be better able to speak to it.
So if the mystery person
like
wants to also unmute.
That was me. So this is
Thank you,
Rochelle.
Rochelle.
Yep. So I'm actually a clinical therapist, and the type of therapy that one of the types of therapy that I do is called internal family systems. And within that work, we've been looking at collective legacy burdens that are passed on from generation to generation through our systems within our culture that people embody and take on as parts of who they are, and affects how we interact with ourselves and with one another. And we identified within that, they've had some wonderful conversations around this that I think have been incredibly healing, and they're trying to grow this into from just personal therapy into more community-based kinds of things, and looking at our collective legacy burdens in our country being racism, paternalism, materialism, and individualism, and the way that these have really affected how we see ourselves and then how we communicate with one another. They affect our individual relationships and the way that we interact with everyone in our lives. And so really trying to use that for healing within our communities.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's another form of the shadow that isn't
Yes.
visible at all times. And that's great. Thank you for adding that. I'm just going to read a couple of the shadow missions. One is to survive as a church during these lean times. Absolutely. I keep on saying to people, if you have any kind of endowment or anything, a rainy day fund, it's not going to get any rainier than it is now. So need to figure out to use that for your current maybe, and and shortchange the grandkids who would inherit the congregation if you need to. Are there other shadows here? I thought I saw some, but okay, St. Cloud, UU Fellowship, being very careful about how we discuss anything spiritual or religious, needing to make the fellowship something for everyone from a humanistic perspective. Our real mission is very long and not specific, with 8 different bullet points. So yeah, if you have, if you have that kind of 8-thing bullet point, it's really hard then to figure out, okay, will we fund or not? But it's interesting to make sure that that you're preserving, in effect, or the shadow appears to be preserving that everyone here is a humanist. And then first, St. Louis has several shadow missions, growing the church membership without having to change as a result, and upholding eternal standards of what is important in worship, like what type of music. Patricia says, seems to be inspire more conversation than the mission. Oh, the shadow mission seemed to inspire more conversation than the mission. Although our congregation size varied quite a lot, our shadow missions were very similar. That's great to do. So were you surprised by the concept of the show? There's even more, there's lots coming here. And just to let you know, one of the things you can do, you can in the chat, if you click on the 3 little buttons, it says more, and you can save the chat, and you can save it as it is now and do it again at the end. And that will give you this wealth of different congregations and mission statements. That now someone asked, should our mission statement and our mission be the same? I think that you could have many of the mission statements I see are really more value statements than missions. The mission should be about how should be much more succinct. So you might want to keep that and call it a value statement instead. Phil, do you have any wisdom on this?
Between the mission statement and the value statement?
Well, whether or not should the mission and the mission statement be the same, or do you also, I don't know if you also agree that what many people call mission statement might be more of a values statement.
Well, it grows out of the values, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think the mission objectives on that little chart we had,
Oh, yeah.
You have a mission statement and then mission objectives. I think the mission objectives are like a more practical way to talk about the mission, and they may vary over that 5-year time, perhaps, or something like that, a way to start enacting them. So I think that maybe gets a little bit to when you talk about a difference between the actual mission statement and then what your mission truly is, I think, as you're acting it out in the world. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Okay.
And Sam says, do some churches have established shadow missions, or is it something we can assume based on what is elevated during services, meetings, where, yeah, it's not a shadow mission if you're explicit about it. So the shadow is what you don't see or what you're not stating out loud. So it's really the difference between the implicit and the explicit mission too. How clear are you? And some shadow missions can be great. It's not that they're bad, but it's the unspoken assumptions about why you exist that can be there. And I'm just looking at what else is in the chat, see if there are any other questions as opposed to these great statements. Oh, Glenn says that the shadow mission is probably to be the university's liberal religious thought training and outreach vehicle for our red state. That's, yeah. And as Jamie says, that's not a bad one, to provide an alternative for places. So then, the shadow mission, and Andrea says, do as I say, not as I do, actions of the congregation. So you can see it's really about having this sense of what is there. And Lisa writes, I had never thought of a shadow mission. I think this would be really interesting to explore with the leadership and congregants and bring forth conversations about how to acknowledge the shadow mission and determine the next steps to integrate it based on what is discovered. Yes, financial planners will often have you look at your credit card statements and your checkbooks or whatever to see where are you really spending your money as opposed to your goals or your budget, to help you understand the difference between these things. So this is all great. Yep.
And I just say, looking at your calendar too, you can easily
Oh, yeah.
see, what are you spending your time doing as a people? what's going on in your congregation? What do people know that you're actually doing?
Right.
By looking at your calendar. So that says a lot about your mission or your shadow mission as well.
Right. It does. And every time I share from my one computer, even if I don't want the sound on, it puts it on. All right. So I'm now trying to get us past this. All right. So one of the things I want to talk about too is because we've told you we're going to be talking, everything is going to be phrased or put in the light of how does the pandemic impact us, and how does the dismantling of systemic white supremacy culture also enter into this. So shifting a bit now to the coronavirus impact. And some of the questions that are great to ask at this point is, how can you carry it out when you can't be in person together? Are there things that you can do? If it's caring for each other, how do you do that? If it's changing the world, how do you do that? What are the ways you can do it? Or is your mission on hold because it's too difficult right now? And that's not a bad thing. That's a reality thing for many of our congregations. And then the question of how can you hone a mission when you can't be together? A lot of different congregations have done this through a collection of small group processes. So they will have maybe some questions that they have in small groups that they meet online, and they hone that and they gather that information and pull it together and then share that with the congregation and have that. So you can do that. It takes a lot more. It takes a different frame of work. I'm not sure if it takes more work. Technologically, there's more work, but the enticing people to be involved in small groups might be easier online when they don't have to leave home than if you're asking them to schlep down to the church or your building to do that. So there's a way to do that. And how do you bring in their values in that? So you can do it through an online process. Another question is how, if you're not carrying out your mission now, how has it changed? And has it changed only for these times? Or how do you think it might change going forward based on the pandemic? What have you discovered that becomes more important to you? And might you have a temporary mission that takes into account these times? Some congregations have taken up a different social justice movement during these times, such as there's some that have provided free pantries along the lines of the free little libraries. There are others that are serving food to people who, with the soup kitchens and other venues being closed physically, there's one person I know, a congregation I know in Missouri, where they are feeding people 2 and 3 times a week. They just do a pop-up at this park or that park in order to be able to provide for people who have food insecurity during these times. So there's lots of ways that you can, if you have the energy, create new things or maybe live out your mission in these times. But it's always good to be asking, how is this pandemic changing us and what is happening? And then there are a couple of comments now we offer. We offered official sanctuary for protesters for racial justice. Yes, I'm feeling, Kristen, you might be in the Louisville First Congregation, or maybe another one, but I know that they did a great job of that. Who leads the work of moderating the creation? The interim minister, someone from the UUA. Who does this work outside the church? We do have some consultants who can work with you, some of our adjunct consultants. One of the books that I strongly recommend, and I'm not sure if I have it, wait, just wait, pay no attention to that woman moving around her office. I'm not seeing it right offhand, but I will look for it in the next breakout session so I can show it to you. There's a book called Holy Conversations, which has, Phil's looking for his in his bookshelf. Okay. Holy Conversations is a book that goes all the way from through a mission vision process through to the end of that process. And there it is, Holy Conversations by Alice Mann and Gil Rendell. And Phil will enter that, I'm sure, in the chat because he's so good at that. They lay out a system for how you do that. often the determining of the mission for the congregation is often something that can be co-led by a minister if you have one and the board, or they may choose to appoint a committee to do that. But because it's about the whole church, it should be at that upper level that makes the determination you're going to go ahead with this process and figure out what is the best way to do this. And it can be your interim minister, it can be your a team that's doing it. But the Holy Conversation book is one of the best I found. It has step by step, and it also has a section that helps you figure out where you might need to start in the process, so you don't have to do everything, but you can do parts of that. So thanks, Phil, for putting a link to that there. So what about white supremacy culture? Other questions to always ask about your mission is, who is impacted by it? Who is impacted positively and who is impacted negatively? So who is included, who is not? How big is your footprint on the land in one way? And what systems and structures are you supporting by your mission? Does your mission support a status quo that you don't believe in, either inside your congregation or outside your congregation? Does your mission include everyone you want inside, or does it not? And it can be, though it often isn't just this simple, it could be language too. We're going to stand for justice. Well, stand can be problematic for people. It doesn't necessarily make everyone who doesn't have the ability to stand feel like they can be part of it. So what might other words be there? And of course, you're never going to get the perfect statement. And you should not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. But in ways, what subtle ways are we telling people they belong or don't belong into our congregation? And so, and of those systems, then which are the ones that you want to support? Which don't you? And how does all of this impact your mission? So these are some of the other questions to be thinking about. And we're going to give you an opportunity to do that again. We're going to put you back into small groups. And again, we're going to follow the same pattern. You're going to be in the same group. So you can use the same order, or you can mix up the order depending on how you want to do that. We want you to take the first 2 minutes to work individually in silence while you're coming up with your answers to the questions. Then again, share in the group with the 2 go-arounds with the questions. And the questions are, who would notice if you ceased to exist, going back to the story I told about Dr. Glenn Thomas Rideout. And then, how has the pandemic, I'm trying to type and talk at the same time, how has the pandemic changed your mission and whether you are seen by the community? So do they know that you exist? And you might, if you want, also, you can throw in some conversation about, is the change permanent or something you want to take forward from these times? Any questions at this point before I open up the rooms again? And it helps once you've typed them in to hit enter so they actually show up in the chat. All right, so we're going to give you then just about 25 minutes again, and then we'll come back together. We're going to give you probably about 22 because we're getting short on time.
Lisa?
So, yes.
I will note that the chat gets cleared when we go into breakout rooms.
Okay.
Oh.
Interesting, because that didn't used to happen. I can post it
Not
again
all of
once
them
you're
do
in
that.
breakout rooms.
It happens to me, so maybe someone else in my group can just give me the questions
So
again.
it's, who would notice if you cease to exist? Who would notice? And then, how has the pandemic changed your mission? And I'll post it again once I send you to the rooms, just in case that helps. So here we go. And again, if you can't find your invitation, go to the bottom on the more button, breakout rooms, you should find the invitation there.
Yeah, it gets labeled join breakout room.
Okay,
if you've
join breakout
assigned
room.
one. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Jane
Oh.
RRS might be okay.
Oh.
And that's Wendy with the picture.
I knew what book you were going for.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, and I keep on forgetting to haul all my resources into one area.
I know. Well, yeah. Can I
Yes.
just pop in a thing about the Future Change Network
Oh
framework?
yeah. Yeah.
Because that fits totally with you just said. It's like,
Great.
what are we going to keep? What are we going to let go of? What have we learned that we want to hang on to and build on? And
Right.
what did we quit doing? And what do you want to start
Yeah.
again?
Yep. Yep.
Registration's open for it, so let's see if we can get some people to
Well, I'm going
register.
to well, welcome back, everyone. I hope the conversations were good, and that you had a good time in your breakout rooms.
We need time next time, Lisa.
Pardon?
We need more time next time. We were having
you need more time. You're breaking up a bit, Wendy, but I hear you saying you need more time next week. Yeah, well, as you notice, just to let you know, we gave you a lot more time than we gave the first session of this class. We're learning, and both every one of our staff members are taking a class. Not all of us right away, but we are taking a class that will excuse me, let me get my brain. It's called Fundamentals of Online Teaching. So we can learn how to do this better. And one of the things we've learned is you all need time to be able to do that. So it's great when you do the preparatory material. And I'm sorry you were having such a good time. I didn't want to bring you back. And Phil says there's never time enough. You are so right. There is never time enough. And so if you want, feel free to post some things in the chat about your conversations. I want to ask Phil, though, to let you know about a program that Mid-America is doing that dovetails with what we've been talking about today.
Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, I stumbled across searching things on the web. There's an organization in England called the RSA, and that stands for the Royal Society for Arts, Manufacture, and Commerce. But they're really about change. They're an organization that really just deals with change and the idea that change is inevitable and that you should be intentional about how you go about planning for change. And so I put in the chat, I don't know if it's up there towards the top, but we are doing offering a workshop with Ian Burbage, who is the associate director of the RSA lab, and he developed this future change framework, which is basically a way of assessing what we've stopped doing because of the pandemic, what we've started doing because of the pandemic, what we want to keep from what we've started, what we need to pick up again, what we might want to leave dropped, and just ways of assessing, where we are right now in this very much in between time. So it's a workshop on April 24th, pretty much the same time frame here, 10 a.m. To 1 p.m. on Saturday, April 24th.
Those were Eastern time, so it would be 9 to noon
9,
for
yeah,
Central.
thank you, and 9 Central, 12, yeah. And there's a sliding scale fee for it. It's not too much, but $10, $15, $20. I'm very excited about this. I can't imagine, honestly, I was telling Lisa, I can't imagine any congregation right now doing any kind of strategic planning or mission work or values work or anything like that without taking into consideration the effects of the pandemic. And that's what this is all about. That's what this workshop is all about. So I think it's perfect for folks who've just done leadership school too. And I believe, Lisa, it comes after your last session. It's the Saturday after your last session. I know you're probably going, oh, well, we've done all these Saturdays and I'll take a Saturday off. But, you know, if you can't do it, take a look at that and see if there's somebody in your congregation who can do it. I would suggest having teams of 2 or 3 just to get to know it. But I think it's an excellent tool. And it's really worth acquainting ourselves with it, because even if you don't use this tool exactly, the questions that it brings up, you know, are things that we need to have in our minds as we do our planning. So we're going to be using it in our Mid-America staff group too, as we look at how we're going to be continuing our work as we move out of the pandemic. So I wanted to just put a plug in for that. Thank you, Lisa.
You are most welcome, Phil. And if you're ever looking, you know, for an event, if you remember April 24th, if you go to uua.org/Mid-America, you can click on our events calendar and go to April 24th, and there will be a link there to those kind of events. So next time we meet, which is in 3 weeks' time, we're going to be talking about systems and congregational systems. And how does your congregation operate as a system? The materials are up for you already in session 3 in the UU Institute site. And remember, you might have to mark complete on the section before in order to move forward into this material. So that's up there. The Zoom information is up there for that next session. And hint, it's the same for all 4 sessions. There's also a case study there that I want you to think about. You might want to print it out, because we're going to be using that in session 3 and again in session 4 when we talk about conflict. I noticed that some of you have caught on to the fact that we can have conversations in that website. So you can post conversations there, comments as you're reading this stuff. Other people will be replying to that. That's always a great thing to do. And so welcome you to do that. And I think that's about it for today, unless there are some great or some questions, great or small, that you wish to ask. We have like 4 minutes left before we release you to the rest of your day. Anything else that isn't clear or you want some help with? All right. If not, then I want to thank you all for being here again today. It's one of the things that is really gratifying is that because you keep coming back time after time, you obviously think this is worthwhile, and that's what we always want to provide for you. So thank you, and we will see you in 3 weeks' time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.
Bye.
Thank you. Wonderful.